Good morning, everyone, and thank you all so much for joining us today. My name is Gina Miller, and some of you will know me from the court cases against the governments of Theresa May and Boris Johnson, which concerned their attempts to put themselves above the law, to bypass our representative democracy. Today, we're being governed by people who still consider themselves to be above the law, above the rules, even when lives depend upon them, who care more about their bank balances, wallpaper, and drinks parties than the lives and welfare of the people who put them where they are. Their broken promises have resulted in a broken country, and it is utterly indefensible. And when they do break the rules, misspend our money, line their own pockets and those of their chums, where are the consequences? In our outdated, naive political system, where trust and honor are supposed to be enough safeguards. A system we can all see blatantly does not work. We look to the opposition to oppose and to put into words our fury, but their silence is too often deafening. I want to give voters the opportunity to vote for a party they can genuinely believe in, not one that confirms the status quo, Latin, some would say, for the mess we're in, but a party that wants to represent our country at its very best, not its worst. That is why I am standing here before you today, to provide a choice for the 66% of people in our polling who say they would consider voting for a new political party. A new party that champions greater transparency, accountability, competence than existing parties provide. To fix our manifestly unfair voting system, where in the 2019 general election, the Conservatives gained an additional 49 seats in England. That was a 9.2% increase in seats, with just a 1.8% increase in votes. How can that possibly be fair or representative? The two main parties defend their unfair voting system by saying they are broad churches and represent a wide range of voters. Really? Two parties that have turned in on themselves, obsessed with appeasing different wings of their own wayward parties, whilst our country descends into ever greater chaos and suffering. Our polls show that their immoral, irresponsible behavior is damaging all political parties and trust in all politicians. It is not in any of our interests that politicians and our voting system are held in the low esteem that they are today. When even members of our armed forces feel betrayed and demoralized after the shambolic fall of Kabul, when a minister lazed on a sun lounger as our soldiers and those they went to help were in mortal danger. Ours is a country that is crying out for change, in need of a party that's focused on right and wrong, not just right and left, that understands the need for a government that works for everyone, not one rule for them and another for the rest of us. A system that does not reward weakness and cynical self-serving behavior, that means a slapdash government gets away with treating us with contempt. As a nation, we were willing to trust this government when it said it needed special emergency powers to respond to the pandemic. But it has grossly abused that trust. Billions of pounds misspent, contracts awarded to their mates, even a cabinet minister's pub landlord. You really couldn't make it up, but sadly, it happened in our country. Worse, we have a prime minister who fessed up yesterday, finally admitting he attended a party in Number 10's garden, while the rest of us abided by the law, behaved responsibly, and stayed at home. It is outright hypocrisy. What an utter dishonest way to behave. And now we see the consequences. Millions more families pushed to the brink of poverty, deprived of proper assistance, businesses and individuals hit by the pandemic, excluded from support for nearly 2 years, precious little cash for catch-up effective programs in schools, the future of our nation. Over the coming months, the True and Fair Party will publish a detailed program of institutional, economic, and social policy reform for bolstering the separation of powers to strengthen our democracy. A program that will have positive ripple effects across all policymaking and departments. Rather than lurching from crisis to crisis, there would be proper bandwidth for better strategic thinking, more comprehensive and considered long-term planning, transparent and robust evaluation to ensure better value for taxpayers. I come at this as someone whose whole career has been about focusing on outcomes and detail, about practical solutions, doing what's right, not merely what's popular at the time. Above all, fighting for the rights of others. I have been a transparency and social justice campaigner for over 30 years, including fighting in the 1990s for children with special needs, like my own daughter, to get access to special needs support. As a survivor of domestic abuse in the mid-noughties, raising awareness and calling for better support and police training to deal with victims and families of domestic violence at a time when support was practically non-existent. After the global financial crisis in 2008, when families and communities saw their futures wrecked by the behavior of bonus-hungry bankers, I brought real and lasting change. Change that has benefited hundreds of thousands of pensioners and savers in the decades and more since. From 2010, funding and drafting proposals for modern-day slavery legislation and supply chain governance. And more recently, campaigning for bolder measures in the online safety bill, so it does not end up being a huge wasted opportunity. Whatever people may say about me, and they've said quite a few things over the years, I get results, real results that help real people in the real world. And the threads running through all my work has been exercising my civic duty, concern for others who are overlooked, mistreated, and suffering. To call out bad behavior and dubious practices amongst those who hold high office in both the private and public sectors. To inspire others to speak up and speak out. In the coming months, True and Fair will publish a bold, grown-up, and urgently needed plan, a roadmap that sets out a new vision for our country, where we can all share in the story of our nation and make a valued contribution to its future chapters. We have witnessed how this government bullies and blames people who dare to question its behavior, its careless plans, empty slogans, and boosterism. Its overriding priority is not to serve the country, but to cling on to power at all costs, systematically downgrading the few checks and balances we do have in place to guard against our country becoming an elected dictatorship. Just look at the bills before Parliament. Bills that will have the chilling effect of silencing our voices on the streets, in the courts, and at the ballot box. The Police Crime Sentencing and Courts Bill, the Judicial Review and Courts Bill, the Nationality and Borders Bill, the Elections Bill. As I speak to you today, we are perilously close to the elective dictatorship we were once warned about. And I do not believe we have the option of sitting this out, waiting for the existing opposition parties to get their houses in order, when our basic rights and freedoms are being taken away from us. not by stealth, by statute. When our friends abroad, who once thought of us as a responsible, confident, and tolerant nation, say they hardly recognize us anymore. As we endure the worst possible government at the worst possible time, and an opposition party trying to figure out who they are and what they stand for, I believe we must act decisively and urgently to ensure our children and our children's children are not the generations burdened with the dismal legacy of clearing up our mess because we lacked the moral courage to stop the chaos. The simple truth is that the status quo suits the Conservative and Labour parties, more concerned with preserving a tired old duopoly that works for them and not for anyone else. True and Fair will aim to live up to its name, challenging a status quo that is blatantly unfair, undemocratic, and dishonest, and definitely not in our national interest. Advocating change that helps us become a nation and people at peace with ourselves. A country where people have the opportunity to unlock their potential, to go as far as their talents, skills, and hard work will take them. A country that stands tall in the world, commands respect abroad when people see how we conduct ourselves at home. There is a critical need to acknowledge and address the decay and damage our country has been suffering over the last 12 years. Our leaders have been running our country on the cheap, cutting services to the bone, driven by short-termism, a lack of strategic thinking about what works best for the British people. We need to go much further, much faster than any opposition party has had the resolve to do or even proposed to do until now, to reduce inequalities through real solutions rather than empty rhetoric. Under my leadership, our party will focus on developing policies that work for people in their everyday lives, policies driven by data and facts, by best practice in markets and policies around the world, but imbued with the extraordinary talent, expertise, and innovation we are lucky enough to possess in abundance at home. Policies unerringly practical in their intent and design, capable of being implemented in the real world, effectively, efficiently, transparently. As our country faces major societal, macroeconomic, environmental, and infrastructure-related problems, we cannot afford to treat any of these issues as an afterthought, especially not the economy. It is only by having a strong and successful economy that we can have strong and successful public services. Business is not a dirty word, nor a four-letter one. We must seek to get our public finances in order. When our national debt stands at £2.3 trillion, that's 96% of GDP. Expressed another way, the national debt has almost tripled in size since 2009, resulting in around £32,000 for every person in the UK. And servicing the interest rates on this national debt alone now exceeds what we spend on defence. What we now have is a government that's got into the habit of throwing money indiscriminately at every problem that confronts us, with the National Audit Office disclosing that only 8% of big government spending plans actually have robust evaluations in place. Our country must not be just about earning money. No, must not just be about spending money, it must be about earning money. As we experience inflationary pressures, rising energy costs, and tax rises from April, which are only going to add pain to the long-suffering British public, struggling to cope with the cost of living crisis that threatens to engulf us all. COVID lockdowns that have plunged nearly 1 million people into poverty. 2.4 million people already live in conditions of dire fuel poverty. Soaring fuel bills in the coming months that are threatening to create a national emergency for an additional 150,000 elderly. And for those in work in the UK, electricity and petrol prices now swallow up an alarming 27% of average weekly take-home pay. So where's the plan? Where's the leadership? While people in the real world are wondering how they're going to make ends meet. If our productivity levels matched our leading global competitors, it might be a different story. But sadly, our productivity doesn't. In 2019, we lacked productivity in the US, France, and Germany by a significant margin. In fact, we only just beat Italy in terms of productivity. And with the Office of Budget Responsibility recently saying that Brexit, yes, I am going to dare to say the word that apparently is banned in Whitehall, is on course to cause a 5% contraction in the size of Britain's economy over the long term. We have to face the facts are the facts. The effects are the effects, irrespective of whether it is more down to COVID or to Brexit. We need strategic, competent leadership. We need competent management of our public finances. As we emerge from the fog of the last 2 years, we owe it to ourselves, to our country, to future generations to demand better. Not politicians running our country by evading their responsibilities, racking up debt, treating our neighbors and partners with barely concealed contempt, having a distant relationship with the truth, and wasting time on flights of fancy. We should be a country that is proud of being a strong and fair democracy, a blazing beacon of compassion, responsibility, and decency. A country that is once again an economic powerhouse that values expertise and excellence, that plays its role on the international stage, not shirks its responsibilities, a country that looks not to the past but to the future for longer-term effective, sustainable solutions on climate change, terrorism, cross-border migration, the digital revolution, and quite possibly a new age of pandemics. All issues crying out for international cooperation and collaboration. As we meet here at the start of 2022, there is growing anxiety. But I believe many of us are shared in a united conviction that we must get our country back on track. True and Fair offers a home to people who share this aspiration, who feel politically homeless, who believe in a more decent, collaborative, humane kind of politics. In the months that lie ahead, True and Fair will, under my leadership, unlock a brighter, better future for Britain, bring long overdue change to British politics, lift the sense of despair that shrouds our nation. If what I have described today strikes a chord with you, I would be absolutely honored if you would consider joining me in this endeavor. It is no longer about asking for change. It is time to demand change. Thank you.